Hello, my name is Andy Jordan, and I am sharing this framework as part of the CISO in a Box project. As a summary, every organization faces a growing number of cyber risks today, and trying to track all of these risks is complicated. And so I've created a framework that makes it clear what threats we're facing today, what we're doing about them, and where our defenses may fall a little short. Have you ever bought or implemented a tool that you realized wasn't fully configured to stop the attack that you expected? Or while you're doing a threat hunt, you notice that you haven't quite got the logging necessary to notice that a negative event might be occurring. So I've been a CISO for quite a few organizations, and outside of the NIST CSF assessment, this tool is something that I use to understand where an organization's capability is to prevent attacks. This tool is especially good for organizations that are 10,000 users or less. However, larger organizations can still use this framework, but they might need to break up this framework across a couple different business critical groups. So this framework is built around 4 key areas. The first is the incident type, which we have here in this specific area. Again, you can expand these as you would like, and then of course the vector for how that attack is occurring. So this will help you understand how attacks are happening today. We're also going to look at the control mapping. So what are the controls that we have today? So we've used a framework similar to the NIST CSF approach, where we're using protect, detect, respond, recovery, and improve. And the goal is we want to understand how the technologies we've purchased play a role in preventing those attacks. So the last one, of course, is going to be that matrix piece of are there things that we're missing in terms of some of these attacks? There's a lot of different teams that would benefit from this type of assessment or framework. The first is going to be the cybersecurity team, or the cyber or SecOps operational team. They're going to use this to help prioritize new control investments based on attack types. They might also use this to identify single points of failure within a specific technology. Another team might be the risk and/or compliance team, and they're going to use this to validate that the critical controls that we have align to address the top threats that organizations are facing. The last team is, of course, our executives, which they need to understand where our budget is going and why. And also they can use this to spot risk exposure before it turns into an incident. So let's take a second to actually look at how this framework is used. You can see in this box, we have our incidents. We also have the vector, or how this attack is going to be used, and then the type of threat event that is taking place. We also have our NIST CSF assessment approach, or something similar to that, to where we have ultimately the identify, which we've called here the early warning stage, our protect, detect, respond, and recovery. And we also have a box here to improve areas or things that we identify as early or quick wins that we might need to go after. This box here is going to be for the specific technology that you've purchased to address this function. And down here are the functions that we have. So ultimately we can ignore, just for the sake of this illustration, these are examples, but we're going to minimize this view right here. So that way we're just focusing on the technology functions. Let's take ransomware, and how ransomware in email that is going to compromise a system is going to be prevented within our organization. Now, in the early warning stage, we can see that threat intelligence feeds are a way for us to identify some C2 frameworks or other indicators of compromise that we might need or want to know about ahead of time, so that way we can prevent or block them. As we go through with this, of course, we can use that information in our firewall to block those types of attacks. We can also use email security appliances to put in blocked rules. We can go through and create custom blocked rules that will allow us to take that information that we pulled up from our threat intelligence feeds and put that into place. And then, of course, we can make sure that we're blocking certain types of attachments in emails, so that way we might be preventing those types of attacks from taking place. There are, of course, some other ones that we have in this protection stage, and that's, of course, antivirus or anti-malware. So let's take the example that maybe it does get through the email system, our local or endpoint antivirus is going to take some analysis of that and prevent it. So we're thinking in this case that it's going to be a EDR. The next one, of course, is system patching, because ransomware often uses vulnerabilities that exist within a operating system already, and then deploys that ransomware package to an environment. So by patching your systems, you're going to make sure that some of those inherent vulnerabilities are being addressed. Next one, of course, is looking at your system configuration. So in the way of making sure that certain types of functionality or features that might, again, open up those vulnerabilities are addressed. We want to secure those. And then, of course, there is a way to make sure that we're segmenting our network, just in case of, hey, maybe some of these devices don't need to get direct data center access. And so in the case that an endpoint might be compromised, we can use network segmentation to more localize the attack as it's occurring. The next one, as we go through, again, we're taking this row here for ransomware. We can see that our next one is going to be system and logging policies. So if we're seeing a mass encryption event across our network, we want to make sure that we have the right logging levels. And we want to make sure that we have our SIM, or our log and event management system, is going to give us the right type of alerts and correlation off of that. The next, of course, we always need to consider our users in these types of situations. So do we have the right security awareness program to train users in the case of how to handle potentially malicious or questionable attachments as they might have them? When we're responding to alerts, this is where our antivirus, we want to make sure that we're getting those alerts in an appropriate and timely manner. So that way, as we're seeing things very quickly, our teams can quickly get engaged to address those things. Last, of course, again, in this row right here, we're going to go after data backups. If we do need to recover, obviously we need our backups to be good. So let's make sure that we have tested our backups, that we're able to restore the information for users or systems as we need it. If we need to get into our disaster recovery plan or incident response activities, this is where it's one of those areas that we should make sure that we understand what that plan looks like. So that way, when we need to spring into action, that's where that places in. That's where that places us. So there's a couple of other ones here that we've just marked as example improvement areas. So this would be things like limit the administrative use or administrator accounts on local systems. And then another one is we might need to centralize some log and alert management pieces. So that way we don't have multiple systems or we need to search through multiple systems. We can centralize all of that. So hopefully this is kind of a good example of how you would use this framework. Again, I've included a legend here that you can use to read through and understand some of those areas. And in this, kind of area here, I've created a legend. So if you do not have or consider these critical processes, this might be an area for you to start customizing that. I do have a blank one here, which you can use for your organization. And I think that would be a good exercise as part of just walking through, again, in the different teams that we had. We had the cybersecurity team or SecOps team. We have risk and compliance, or we have our executives within either business critical processes or business owners as we are working this through. There's a couple of ways that I think you could actually take this framework and improve it. As you're working through this framework, there might be additional ways that you might want to customize it. So in the attack definitions, you can see that we have a whole list here. And so this should map out for you. And this is how we've defined it and included some additional information. So you can see that we have credential attack. Actually, let's go back to the example that we're using. We're going to look at a ransomware event in email and just kind of use that one for example. So we have ransomware, the vector was email, our system compromise was the event, and then we did mark this one as critical. So here's the definition that we have for it, so that way it makes sense for people that might not be, that this might be a newer type of attack to somebody else. And so kind of what exactly are we trying to address here, or what is this attack trying to do? And then we also have we also have included some breaches here, or some information around how we've seen this attack take place today, so that way you can see some analogies of the impacts for organizations. We also have the controls. So in the case that you might need an additional piece or a different technology that you think that this framework doesn't address, here's how that would be added. So in this case, a ticketing system would be a good one. We do have that box for if it's critical or not critical, the definition and how that control is used, and then of course a technology example that you might want to use. So ultimately, you should be able to go through and add all of the information that you need, and this will of course add credibility and context, especially for audits or training or other risk discussions that you're having within your organization. Maturing the framework is another one to where, there are some ways that I could see us making some improvements here. So for example, let's come back to our example here. One of the areas that we have is pretty easy is we have protect, detect, and respond, which is great. But we don't have markers around maturity here. So maybe instead of just, are we doing something or are we not? Maybe we can add a 0 to 5 scale to where how well that we're performing that attack. Whether that is something ad hoc or as we remember, or if it's more defined and documented within an organization. Again, I would keep your framework or your scale simplified and go through that way. Another one is highlighting where no control or gaps, where you don't have controls or you might have a gap in your process. This is roughly there, but I think there's areas for improvement there. And ultimately, as you're going through and adding a risk scoring to this or a maturity scoring, this is going to help you to have a more risk-informed prioritization for which controls that you want to put into which areas. In our example here, let's say that we're going to use our email compromise. Maybe we might want to look at how MFA is used for this as a way to add that type of control. However, maybe that exists in some systems and some ways that you access your environment, but it doesn't help in all areas. And so this might be one of those areas to say, we have this control, but it's just not as far out as we would like. And so using a maturity scale might be a way to help you identify which improvements are best. So I think this framework is, again, really great for organizations that are looking to assess their controls, to understand their attacks. However, I think there's some ways to really mature this framework. One of the ways that I was thinking is that we might be able to use a 0 to 5 scale. And 0 would be, we've never done this before. 1 would be, it might be ad hoc. 2 would be, maybe it's documented, but it's not consistently applied. And things like that, to where you can create your own scaling. But this might be an area for you to look at and say, hey, in all cases, maybe we have a web application firewall, but it's not really mature for all types of attacks and preventing them. Obviously, we want to make sure the control is fit in terms of the attack that it's trying to prevent, but maybe it's good in preventing antivirus, but not as great in preventing phishing attacks. And so this is where you might add a scoring system or a prioritization to help really give you a more risk-informed approach into your controls. So as a summary, this is a framework that helps you identify the attacks that your organization is facing every day and how the controls that you've invested in are helping to keep you secure. This happens in 3 ways. It aligns the threats to the activities or technologies that you're using. It identifies where you might be strong or where you might have gaps within your program. And it helps to guide better decision-making across cyber, IT, and leadership stakeholders. This framework can be downloaded from the CISO in a Box GitHub project. Please check out the description to find a direct link. Please feel free to reach out to me, Andy Jordan, on LinkedIn if you have any questions or want to talk about this framework any further. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.